Welcome, my name is Norman Basigu, and this is Postcards from the Diaspora. We are a youth-led community platform that is focused on connecting Africans and Caribbeans in the diaspora to home. This is the Visual Postcard Series, where we interview and speak with interesting members of the diaspora to learn of their stories, their journeys, and ultimately discuss ways in which we can move forward as a community together. Now, I have a really exciting guest that I'm going to be interviewing today, who's worked at the likes of the World Health Organization and the World Bank, and is a true advocate for social change. So I'm here with my amazing guest, Qali, here this afternoon, who's joined us in London. She's here in town for a couple of weeks, I believe. I think it's for a few weeks, right?
Yes, a few weeks. I'm already leaving next week and it feels like time's passed really quickly.
Yeah, London will do that to you. I mean, how's your time been here so far? How would you describe it? Busy?
It's actually been really chill. I wanted to take the time to just meet up with friends and family and go to like some creative events. So it's been chill. I feel very inspired by like the creative energy here. So it's been good.
Love that. And I mean, you're going back home to Kenya, I believe, right? So even just like taking that apart, you're Somalian by heritage, but you've lived across Malawi, Denmark, and Kenya. So tell us about that, the idea of, living in Africa in your formative years and also going to school at the International School of Kenya.
Yeah.
What did that mean for you, that your connection to home and how that formed you in your own
years?
years?
So yes, I was born in Denmark, and when I was about 8 years old, we moved to Malawi.
Right.
And then as a teen, grew up in Kenya.
Yeah.
And I think that what moving to Africa at such a young age did for me is sort of solidify who I am as an African person.
Okay.
So whereas maybe some of my cousins and that are part of the diaspora and live in Europe and in the States sort of struggle with this like in between of like, I'm not white at all, but I'm also not really from where my parents are from.
Yeah.
It creates a dissonance for a lot of people. And so I think growing up in Africa in my formative years, sort of everybody's black. So you belong and it's really comfortable and you don't think about those things until moving back to Europe for university and then sort of being faced with the things that people of color will experience living in the UK or in America. And I'm like, oh, so this is how the other side lives, So yeah, it helped me be very comfortable in my skin. Although as a Somali, we're just like incredibly proud, but definitely made me feel grounded in who I am and where I'm from.
Awesome. And I want to pick apart that word belonging. So that sense of cultural rooting identity, which has carried you through the world. So you came back to Europe, back to the UK to study at the University of Brighton and Imperial College London. This transition into being in UK society and also being part of the diaspora, as you said, you had both sides of the coin, living in the continent, but also being here. So what was that like, the idea of being in the diaspora, how we see things, and also your personal identity? I know you said you're quite proud of who you are and you had that rooting, but what was it like when you came over and you're actually part of this system for a period of time?
I think on the one hand, because I've lived in different places and also the environments that I was in were incredibly diverse, everybody's from different places. So you're not that special, being a Somali, Danish person, because there are people that are like all types of mixes and all types of upbringing. So everyone's just themselves. So when I came to the UK, I kind of felt like a chameleon, also because I think a lot of people don't realize the sort of like cultural exports that we always talk about American soft power, but there's also British soft power, like I came over here having listened to Mr. Jam on BBC Radio 1 Extra and like knowing, drum and bass and garage and jungle music and all of these things and grime. So to me, I didn't feel so out of the know as everybody else. However, the way that Black people interact with one another was different here. So, there's the African Caribbean Society at university.
ACS.
Exactly. And so I would go to one and I'm just like, the one at Brighton, when I was there weren't a lot of East Africans.
There never are. There's not many of us. East Africa represent in the building.
So that was really surprising to me because I'm just like, well, one, I'm not really much of a partier like that, so I don't really fit in with like the social events. But also, like, just culturally as well, I'm not Caribbean, I'm not West African, and so
it's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Also because like and this isn't a knock at all, but like there is certain like, you know, language that we use with people that are like us, or like cultural things that we exchange with people like us that makes us feel included. And so when talking about this idea of belonging, I think the very like crux of it is people being able to like see you and accept you for who you are without you having to fit a mold. And I feel like coming here, I felt like I needed to fit a mold, whether out, you know, career, uni stuff, but also interpersonally with other African people.
I understand. No, it's a really tricky thing to navigate, and I think it's an interesting pivot. So, you know, from you living on the continent, coming here, and then deciding in sort of your career, you wanted to be somebody that's affecting change and being a real change maker, and working at the likes of the World Health Organization or World Bank, which we're going to pick apart very soon. But just taking one step back, what is it that made you want to work with such renowned global entities and organizations, and, you know, to contribute to the world and Africa specifically? What was it about your lived experiences that made you want to be part of that change in a real way?
You know, I was thinking, that's been something that I've been thinking about quite a lot, and I don't really have a one answer to that. Earlier I was speaking to a friend and I was saying that maybe it's part nature and nurture, to be honest, because I have a father who worked in development and in the humanitarian sector for over 30 years. So I was familiar with the space. I also have a mom that worked in the health sector for a really long time. So I'm already raised by two people that believe in service and like giving back. And then I also have a younger sister that was born with Down syndrome. So she's, I mean, that being that intimately familiar with someone that lives with disability or isn't neurotypical, that also changes the way that you see things. So I already have sort of like, from the nurture's perspective, I already have that inclination to want to help and be there for people. Yeah. But then the other side is that I think I, on some level, owe Africa. You know, like I think that I'm also someone of faith, and I feel that if I've been blessed in this way to live the life that I've lived and been to the places that I've been, then why not give back? You know, like that's just what my morals and my values are. But also that the reason that I see the world the way that it is because not only of Africa, but just travel in general, that I see myself as a global citizen. And so what does that mean if, like, what do we owe each other as just human beings, you know? So I think that that's what led me to this type of work, that I'm somehow just wired because of my different experiences.
I can really resonate with what you're saying, and can I just say I really respect you for all the work that you do and the selflessness that you have, and also like the holistic vision of the world that you have, because I think the world can be a very consuming place, and it can force you to feel a bit like, let me just sort out my life and focus on my problems. But you know, you moved around so much, but you still have your eye to humanity, and that's a really noble trait. And can I just say I really respect you for wanting to affect real tangible change in that sense. And I think one example I really want to pick apart from the work that you've done is you've previously been a senior policy, advocacy and campaigns coordinator, and you drafted World Vision's Somalia's first policy on ending violence against children. So if you're able to talk a bit about this or any work around this, whatever comes to mind, just sort of what that process entailed and some of the bigger challenges or issues you think you're seeing in Somalia's development in that sense, basically.
I think that in general, when I first moved to Somalia, I'd also just never been. So
walk us through that, actually moving to Somalia. What age did that come, and how was that initial process?
So that was 2018. If my maths, so I was 25. I just recently
You're still at 25. You're good. You're still at 25.
Thank you. Genetics, East Africa.
Thank God.
So I was 25 at the time, and it was sort of like my big job after doing my master's. And I'd moved there, and the reason that I accepted the offer was less about the job, more about the fact that I would be moving to Somalia, because I always had this vision that I wanted to go back, but it's not like my parents were traveling back regularly. I mean, both of them, my dad hasn't been back since the 90s, my mom hasn't been back since the 80s, so, you know, the opportunities were scarce. So moving there, I think that one of the things that being raised in Africa prepared me for is not being shocked by just sort of the disorganization of like systems, governments, things like that. but also being able to relate to people that maybe don't have the means that you do and stuff like that. Because I think that sometimes, I mean, in a place like London, for example, you see poverty, you see homelessness, you see all of these things, but it's still not the same as when you go home.
Yeah.
You know? And I think that it's even more heartbreaking when people have to go through that at home, you know, like you're suffering at home. So I think that in that role, for example, I think, and a lot of the work in Somalia, the challenges today are really around governance and not having people that maybe have goodwill in positions of power. And also a lot of the systems being duplicated, or, you know, a lot of change in government. So maybe some people do a good job and then they're sort of like fired, or like there's a changeover. Then you have to start from scratch again. So you're always starting at point zero. I think that was the most challenging thing. And then also being a young woman at the time, like people not necessarily respecting that, or, you know, not wanting to give you the time of day. So I think working in a context like Somalia, and anyone will tell you, you have to be relentless. And like it's quite tough to like keep that hope and that momentum to like keep going. But yeah, that's I think the major challenge. Yeah.
Thank you for the insight. This is going to be my last question, but I think now makes a good time to ask it in terms of from the issues or challenges, I should say, that you've seen as a member of the diaspora, somebody that has existed between the worlds of the West and back home and been working in our systems back home. What do you think we could be doing as diaspora to help overcome some of those challenges or contribute to the betterment of? What do you think? I know it's part of a very
big
question. That's a whole podcast in itself. But in a sort of in a footnote sense, you know, what sort of things do you think we could be doing, or what could be done in a more general sense?
I think, first of all, before even thinking of like us solving anything, I think that's wanting to actually develop a relationship with Africa, because I think that we all, like whether you're African or Caribbean, or you're just part of the Black diaspora that's connected to these places, you know, we get used to seeing our parents like sending money home, like remittances and things like that, which props up a lot of our extended families and helps and all of these things, and it's useful. But of course, it's not the end all be all. There's a lot of criticisms of the aid sector, which are very valid, and how that sort of like handicaps African economies. But I also think that part of the diaspora, especially like when you're born in a city like London, if you don't have a relationship to back home, then where do you even start? You know, so I think that actually being able to develop a relationship with Africa, and that's starting from a genuine curiosity, and just want to know, besides just like what you've always been guided by, like your parents or whatever. I think that is a genuine start, because any relationship has to begin from a place of, I guess, equality, like I see you, you see me sort of thing, rather than, oh yeah, I'm coming in to like save
fix
you
everything
and
change
fix
the
things.
systems.
Because like, you know, it just because we've been to like all of these institutions in the West doesn't necessarily mean we know better.
Or that these systems work as they're supposed to, there, or serve the purpose, because they're different structures.
Exactly, you can't just copy paste either. So I think that actually developing that relationship with Africa, however that looks for you, because it's personal, and starting from there. And I feel like the more that you get to know a place or know a people, you're going to see the ways that you might be able to apply yourself, because it isn't a one size fits all. And I also want us to give each other the grace and the space to be able to articulate what that is, and imagine what that could be for us, because we're not all the same.
Agreed. And on that tip of, you know, us creating change or impacting change in that sense, and in a newer sense, if I look over the course of your career, you seemingly have pivoted into more creative, freelance and consultant-based roles. So, for example, being a creative director at Chronicle Health and hosting an incredible podcast, Connect. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah, the Connect.
Connect with a Q. There we go. You know, leading conversations with change makers, which again is very admirable. So, What inspired this shift to more creative roles, and do you feel this has helped you in your mission to fulfill, the change you want to see and also your wider mission?
Yeah. So I think that being in creative spaces is something that comes most naturally to me.
Yeah.
So growing up, writing and photography were my main sort of like outlets.
Right.
And I think moving around that helped me make sense of the world around me, sort of like writing. And so I always had like this parallel creative life while like going through school and uni and working and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And once the pandemic hit, I was unemployed for the first 5 months of it. And the opportunities that I started getting were around communications work, which makes sense because I can work across different media or mediums. And so, that's how it happened, that in the past 5 years, I've been able to combine sort of my very serious jobs with my creative abilities. And I feel like it makes a lot of sense that, especially for a place like Africa, that the narrative has to change. I truly do believe in that. And if we can't tell our own stories, we're always going to be, victim to the stories that are told about us by people that are not from the continent, And so being able to storytell around social change and like impact, social impact, that has been something quite fulfilling, and that's how I ended up here, by just combining my interests and being extra nerdy about these things.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think on a sort of closing note, you've worked with some incredible organizations, the World Health Organization, World Bank. These are very scary names because they're so global and so big. And you've worked with so many of them. So I think as a closing note, for someone who might be watching this thinking, oh my God, that sounds incredible. How do I apply? How do I even get a look in or intern there? What advice would you give to anyone out there that wants to affect change in the way that you have, working at those really globally renowned organizations? What's the sort of way to start getting their profile correct or even getting, knowing what step one looks like?
I can definitely understand why a lot of people look towards these sorts of institutions, because they have, pedigree and history and all of these, and, a lot of influence.
That stature,
But I also think that we're living in a time now that, because of geopolitics, because of funding and stuff like that, it's not going to be the same as it was 20 years ago. So what I've always told people, and this is also true for myself because I didn't end up at all of these like names at the beginning of my career, is that I would truly want young people to think outside of these big institutions and be able to refine their skills and their thinking in other ways. Maybe it is working with startups, maybe it's working like very local with charities, like whatever it is. But ultimately, you don't need to be in these institutes. Like if you are someone who wants to like create change and like be part of this, you don't need to be part of these institutions to do it. And you can create the spaces yourself to be able to do that, especially at a time today where this change is already happening, And there was a piece of advice that someone gave me when I got the job in Somalia and I was going to move. And she was just like, Qali, no matter what job title you do, make sure that once you leave a job, people remember you by the impact that you had. Because a job can come and go. That job title, that role comes and goes. And once it's gone, not only are they going to rehire somebody else, like you're going to be forgotten if you're not someone who can, affect change outside of an organization, And this, I guess, today, a lot of people talk about like branding and like all of these things. And I mean, yeah, to an extent it is that. But I want young people to be able to, I guess, lean into their uniqueness and how they see the world, and not want to follow what everyone else is doing. And I know that that's very sort of like abstract advice. But also not to rush and think that at 21 you have to have things figured out, because a lot of people don't. But what you do need to do is do. Don't be passive, connect with people, ask questions. But yeah, as an African person, being in these institutions isn't the gold medal that
be or end all,
and we also live in a world now where we have opportunities whether that's through technology, whether that is connecting with people that are like-minded, whatever it is, to be able to impart that change or, you know, that knowledge in other ways. Yeah. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the insights, and I really appreciate you giving us your time and really giving us a window into your mind and what you think as diaspora we can be doing to affect change, and also giving us a window into your lived experiences.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
And that wraps up this visual postcard with Qali, who's given us her incredible perspectives on life, her journey, and her work at some of the world's biggest organizations and entities, and across Africa as well. Now, what she's really shown us is that we really do have the power to affect change ourselves and in our communities. And ultimately has shown us the power of the diaspora, the power of being creative, and the power of, putting your best energy and foot forward. Stay tuned for more visual postcards and more content and output from the postcards from the Diaspora platform. I'm Norman Basigu. Until the next time, take care.